get to know a few mentors in your company and talk to them about how did they get to where they are today, right? And what I learned was an MBA, Master's of Business Administration, was a good way to go for people that had my interests, my goals, et cetera. And so I came back to Oregon to get my MBA. I did apply to the University of Washington and Oregon, and then a couple other programs in Europe that I was kind of interested in going to. But I got into two in Europe and the U of O, and made a pretty big life decision, because if I'd gone to Europe, I would not be speaking to you today. I would be doing something totally different, right? That was like a very clear fork in the road that I didn't take.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 179 of the Camino Voice. Today I speak with the Capital Access Director of Rain Catalyst. Please welcome Nathan Lillegard. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camino Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey Islanders, welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday, or about that. Hope you guys had a good weekend, and hope things are going well in your lives. I know there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, but hopefully you can forget about that and just kind of tune into this podcast episode. So anyways, I'm going to jump into this one. So today I'm interviewing Nathan Lillegard, who you heard about in the opening. And he's the Capital Access Director for Rain Catalyst. And you might be wondering, who's Rain Catalyst and why should I care? Good questions. So I've actually been working with Rain as a contractor since kind of end of January of this year. And what they do, and Nathan will give a better idea about what they do, because he's better at explaining this, because he's been working with them longer and has known about them from their beginnings. But anyways, they go in and they help build entrepreneurial ecosystems in rural areas to help business development. And typically that is in the form of education things, but sometimes they partner with groups, such as they did this time with the EDC of Island County and EDASC of Skagit County, to also provide grant funding. And they weren't involved on the grant funding side, but it was kind of this partnership between the two groups. So anyways, that's how I got connected with Rain. And I think their mission and what they do is just really important. Because of, building the small business community is something that I think is just, I'm a small business owner, so I'm a little biased there, but small businesses run this country. When you look at the percentages, you look at the breakdowns of what the small businesses do for this country, for everything, for the economy, for the new jobs created. I haven't double-checked this stat, but from what I heard, small businesses end up creating 99% of the new jobs, because with big corporations, yes, they come in and they provide a bunch of jobs, but they also fire a bunch of people just to make the books look better. So when you have that give and take, in the end, the big businesses like corporations, like massive corporations, end up not actually providing a net increase in jobs. That's what small business does. I just really am passionate and excited about this stuff that Rain Catalyst does. And so Nathan's going to get into a lot of that. But what his background is actually being the Capital Access Director, helps connect entrepreneurs or business owners with the funding source that's best for them. I think a lot of us that get into business get into it and don't know what we're doing. And a lot of times you just don't know what you don't know. And to find out that there's some easier or better suited funding sources than maybe just going to your bank and getting a loan, or doing a Kickstarter campaign, or a lot of other forms. So that's what he specializes in. And so we talk about that and how he does that and how he connects entrepreneurs with those funding sources. So we get into all that and more, plus his background and all of that as well. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Nathan Lillegard. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camino Voice. Today I'm here with the Capital Access Director of Rain Catalyst. Welcome to the podcast, Nathan Lillegard.
Hello, Brandon. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to join your community of podcast subjects.
Yes. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Nathan.
Sure. So I am a born and raised Oregonian. Both my parents, though, are from Washington State. So my mom is from the east side in Connell, which is a little town north of Tri-Cities. And my dad is from Westport. And they both met at Wazoo. So
Nice.
Go Cougs.
Yeah.
I grew up in a little town outside of Salem, Oregon called Dallas. And Dallas is about like 15 miles west of Salem. Nice. In the days when I was growing up, it was a small mill town. It had a lumber mill and some other manufacturing facilities. And now all of that industry is gone. And it's sort of just a bedroom community for Salem and a sort of services place for healthcare and the wine industry. So,
Okay.
It's kind of interesting. Like the Northwest has evolved over the last like 30, 40 years to be places are very different than they were. So,
Right. We've definitely seen that in Washington. Even going back not that long ago to like Seattle and the suburbs around there, the people that grew up in Seattle or right around there, they're like, it's just completely different.
Yeah. I have all my cousins were in Washington State, and I have very clear memories of like going to Kirkland to visit my cousins for Thanksgiving when that was like way out there and just sort of suburbia, but now it's its whole own new city. And so it's, I'm a small town guy. I'm an Oregon native. I lived in Bend, Oregon for about 5 years from 99 to 04. And then have been in Eugene now since 2004 when I came back here to get my MBA and did grad school. And then I started a company, and then I've been here now for, it's going on 20 years, which is kind of crazy. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to jump in real quick because I think a lot of my podcast listeners might be wondering, like, how did I get in touch with this guy from Oregon? But yeah, just a quick explainer there. I've joined in with the RAIN organization for a contract position. And so I've been working. And if you want to give just a quick overview of what RAIN does and kind of their mission as they enter small business communities.
Sure. So, RAIN was originally an acronym that stood for Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network. And RAIN grew out of an effort by the state of Oregon to invest in entrepreneurial ecosystems in both Eugene and Corvallis, right? So where University of Oregon is in Eugene and Oregon State and Corvallis. And they said, hey, if we put some money into building up these entrepreneurial ecosystems, maybe we can, spur some growth. And so, RAIN in those two areas developed and did its own thing. And what happened was there was pretty early on and the identification of needs outside of the cities, right? So if you call Corvallis and Eugene cities, which comparatively they can be, there was a definite identified need in rural communities outside of the sort of the metro areas for entrepreneurial ecosystem building. And that's where RAIN's founder and our current leader, Caroline Cummings, saw an opportunity to really organize around helping smaller communities build up their entrepreneurial ecosystems. And sometimes that's just as simple as like getting a banker and an accountant and a lawyer and some entrepreneurs in the room together, getting the person who is the man or woman or family who like owns a bunch of buildings in town to come out and talk about entrepreneurship, like stuff like that. And so RAIN exists to, and I'll probably get the marketing text wrong, but basically catalyze ecosystems in rural and underserved communities. So places like outside of Eugene, Lowell and Oak Ridge and Cottage Grove, which are all about 20 miles, outside of the metro area. Places like I grew up in Dallas, that would count as sort of a rural area, in Camino and Island counties, right? Super close to, as the crow flies, Seattle and the major metro area there, but, very different community. So that's where RAIN comes in to help communities do more to develop their economy, right? And there's a few ways to grow an economy, but it's like, I think it's start it, grow it, or steal it. right? So you can bring companies in from outside, like get them to move to your place. You can grow the ones that are already there, which is an important thing, which is one of the things that RAIN helps with. And then the other way to grow an economy is to start it. And we help people identify, what it takes for them to start a business and grow it in their community.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And RAIN has been partnering with the EDC, so Economic Development Council of Island County, to work on the SBIF project, which is a grant that's come down from Washington from the federal level, and do just what you're talking about, try and connect and build out this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And for me, being involved in the project, I've been able to meet a lot of new entrepreneurs, businesses that some I've seen before, some I've never heard of. Like we have a pasta person on Whidbey Island who makes amazing pasta out of her shop there. And so there's been a lot of really cool connections that we've been able to make here. So
yeah, that's awesome. And that's exactly our formula, right? Is find somebody who's local, who can help, like who knows the people and can talk to the people and be on the ground. And then my role as capital access director is to come in and help the entrepreneurs who have a specific need for capital, right? Whether that's like, oh, I need a bank loan, or maybe venture capital financing, or even just grants and other opportunities that do exist. Like, what are those opportunities and how can we help connect entrepreneurs with them, right? So the lady who makes pasta, maybe she needs her own facility, right? And so maybe she needs some sort of commercial lease or some bank lending to buy some equipment or whatever it might be, right? So that's kind of where I come in.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And I want some pasta if I come up there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely figure out a way to get you there. So what did you go to school for then after graduating high school?
So it's kind of an interesting dynamic, right? As you we can all look back on the 20 years of our life from like college to 20 or 30 years now for me, high school to where you are. And I went originally to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles for my first 2 years of college, mainly because I was from a small town and I wanted to get out and see the big city, and you can't get much more big city than that. Mm-hmm. So I did that for 2 years, and I studied urban planning because I was really fascinated by cities and how they grew and how they developed. After a couple years there, I had a great time, loved my experiences at USC, but kind of realized I wasn't a Southern California guy. And if I wanted to stay in Southern California, that's a great school. But I was like, this wasn't my jam. So I transferred back up to U of O in 1995 and spent my last 3 years of college there. And there I studied planning, public policy, and management, which is kind of like a mix of public administration and urban planning, which has actually come to serve me relatively well in that it kind of introduced me to public sector budgeting, a little bit of public sector sort of management and theory, like, what does the public sector do? How does it exist? How does it sort of seek to serve the community? So I got a little bit of that background, and that was useful. And then my first job out of college was for a company in Bend, Oregon that did utility billing software. So like water, okay, electric, sewer, gas type utilities, and the billing system that takes all the data from meters and other things and like sends you a bill. And I don't know if Skagit County PUD was one of the customers, but like there was all those like little PUDs in Washington, each county's got its own. Yep. Like those were our type of customers.
That's awesome. I could say that I guess PUD is slightly different, but our water company could use something like that. We're still getting mailed everything, and they don't.
Well, all we did was make the software that made the bill that they mailed you. We eventually got into more fancy stuff like internet billing and stuff. But think back to like early 2000s, like paying bills on the internet was still a little bit
sketchy,
cutting edge, right? It's still like people were scared about that. But so the great part about that job was I learned a lot about people and processes and organizations. And then I also got to experience how a company changes when they go through acquisitions and ownership changes. So when we started, I think we were owned by a couple of public utilities. And then we were sold to an investment group who was like, hey, we're going to grow this business and make this bigger, right? Classic venture capital. Like, hey, we give you money, you get bigger, we sell you. And so I was part of one of the employees there when that company was going through that process. And then we got sold to a company in Texas, so the venture capitalists got their money back. But then that kind of changed the dynamic, and I'd been there 5 years, and I was like, I think I'll go back to grad school. So came back across the mountains to Eugene and have been here ever since.
Okay. Awesome. So after that experience, when you started looking at grad school, what did you decide to kind of change what you had been studying prior to, or were you trying to dig deeper into what you've already done?
I think I recognize and talking, the classic thing you should do, and I tell all students that I teach now, is like company and talk to them about how did they get to where they are today, right? And what I learned was an MBA, Master's of Business Administration, was a good way to go for people that had my interests, my goals, et cetera. And so I came back to Oregon to get my MBA. I did apply to the University of Washington and Oregon, and then a couple other programs in Europe that I was kind of interested in going to. But I got into 2 in Europe and the U of O, and made a pretty big life decision, because if I'd gone to Europe, I would not be speaking to you today. I would be doing something totally different, right? That was like a very clear fork in the road that I didn't take.
Reasoning there, because obviously, I think if most, early 20s, to get a chance to study abroad, they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. So what was kind of your reasoning there?
I think, I had studied abroad in Norway when I was in college at U of O. Okay. So I'd been there for 6 months and I really enjoyed it. It was amazing. And I kind of wanted to maybe go back. And so the reasoning to pursue that was that, maybe it'd be cool to pursue my life and do these other things. But the decision really came down to the lifestyle, right? Like, if you're going to live in Europe or anywhere abroad, right, you are really committing to that, and you kind of leave your family and all those other things that you have behind. And I wasn't ready to commit to doing that. I had I had a great life in Bend. I mean, it was almost 20 years ago. So Bend was just easy and cool and fun. And I had a condo and life was good. I had mountain biked all the time. I mean, it was really good. It's like, why would I leave all this and then go to some place where I have to kind of totally start over? So, yeah, that's part of it, right? You just sort of, you're on Camino Island. You've been there your whole life. It's like, I feel like I've been around enough to look around and be like, oh, there's other things out there that are cool, but I really like where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure.
You just have to remind yourself of those things in February when it's raining and 35 degrees, right?
Right. And then we run into what we're about to run into, where we get hit with a heat wave.
Yeah, right. It's all good. It's all good. We'll take it.
Right. We take everything. Very cool. So you went to the university and pursued your master's degree. Where'd you go after that?
So in the course of my MBA, I got involved with the entrepreneurship program at U of O. And one of the things that they had at the time was what you'll really call a technology commercialization program, where they had figured out a pathway for technologies developed at the university, right? So researchers that do something cool that they think they could build a business around, they'd figure out a way to connect those people with teams of law and business graduate students to figure out if there was any sort of business opportunity with this particular technology and innovation. We also worked with a place called Pacific Northwest National Lab, which is out in Richland, Washington.
Yeah.
PNNL.
Well, so we actually, my senior project, I was a mechanical engineer by trade.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
We actually did our project was designing and building a thing for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably something that encases nuclear waste or something, right?
Yep.
Crazy.
All sorts of stuff. Yeah.
All sorts of there's just amazing amounts of crazy stuff that they do out there. It's really cool. But that's a long way to get to the fact that I got connected with a professor who had developed a new way to essentially slice and dice DNA. And we had this idea. I had this idea that you could use that technology to help plant breeders and other researchers do things with DNA. And so after my MBA, having gone through the process of really fleshing out the business plan and thinking what the risks were, et cetera, I decided after I graduated, rather than get a job, I just started a company. So wow. I sold my condo in Bend, pocketed some of that money, put it into the company, and away I went. So
very cool. So that was the company. It was called Florogenics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. And how did that go? Because I think, we've all seen TV shows at this point or heard about, unicorn startups or all these different things. What is it like for you when you stepped into that and started that project and that business?
Well, in hindsight, I know that I knew absolutely nothing, right? Like, even though I had an MBA, it's like I knew very, very little about the process of starting a business. And I run into that I teach at the U of O today, and most entrepreneurs, there's so many things that they can't teach. You can't get taught in college or a graduate program, right? You just have to go out and do it. And so I didn't know much. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just know there was some steps I needed to follow to get to where I wanted to be. And so I just kind of kept plugging away, working with mentors and advisors to make sure I was on the right path. And in general, I'd say it was a great experience. But if I had to do it again, there's a whole bunch of things that I would do differently and make different decisions and prioritize different things. But, that's life.
Yeah. So then how did you grow the company when you started that? How did you kind of get off the ground with it?
Sure. So we had a really interesting model in that we were developing a technology that was based on molecular biology methods, right? So it was in the lab, the way you do things with DNA in the lab. And so first we had to make sure that the science worked. And so that involved a lot of trial and error with my co-founder in his lab. He was still a professor at the university, but then we hired away his lab tech to work for the company in a separate lab because you got to do that, right? You got to physically separate your work. So we had a lab tech that was doing work for us to try and make it work. We got the methods to work, and then we had to find customers that would actually pay us to do this thing. So that was at first just a bunch of friends and colleagues of my co-founder who knew what his method could do. And they were like, yeah, I'd like to try an experiment on and we worked in this small organism called zebrafish. It's like it's a classic organism for study of genetics. So we worked for some people in zebrafish, and then that started to be successful. And then we got a few people that would work with us in hazelnuts, because hazelnuts are a big deal in Oregon. We had a guy, we worked with the hazelnut breeder at Oregon State, and a few others. We had a commercial sort of pilot project with a company that makes petunias. And so, or not, they don't make petunias, but they grow and sell petunias. And so we had this sort of like lots of like trial and error to figure out how it works. And that was really the biggest process. And we funded all of that. As I go back to my role as capital access directors, we funded that with a combination of founders capital. So each of my co-founder and I each put some money in. And then we got a matching loan from the city of Eugene, Oregon, which was great. They have a business development loan fund, which is a revolving loan fund. So they loan money out and they collect their payments, and they keep loaning money out to local businesses. And so we borrowed a very small amount, a couple tens of thousands of dollars. And like that gave us enough capital to outfit our lab and hire our first tech. And then it took about 18 months to get to the place where I could hire somebody to do the science and actually do like sales. So in the meantime, I was living off my savings, but also then got a part-time job got a job as a salesperson for a software company. So we kind of bootstrapped it to start with and sort of self-funded other than that loan. And then we brought in angel investors. So friends and family, my family, my co-founder's family, people, literally a woman I met on the airplane one time, some small venture capitalists out of Oregon, some people, friends of friends type thing. So we brought in about $275,000 in angel capital and venture capital. And then in 2010, we had a strategic investor, which was a seed company, literally a corn seed company out of Illinois, that invested in the company because they saw our services as a potential competitive advantage for the research that they were doing.
Okay, very cool. And so I'm sure each project was different within it, but like if you take the hazelnuts, for example, what was the goal in the micro adjustments you guys were making to this?
So this is a pretty good, easy one to understand. And in your world in Skagit County, right, you have lots of seed growers and vegetable growers and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the hazelnut example, basically there's a disease called hazelnut blight or filbert blight, I think it was called, and it's this like I want to say fungus, but I might be wrong. But it's a disease that affects the hazelnut trees and basically causes them to die. And this happens after 10 or 15 years of an orchard being productive. They start to get this blight, and then all the trees die, and then the farmers are like, they have to replant. So there was a breeder at Oregon State who had figured out, he had crossed over 15 or 20 years. He had finally found a variety of that tree that was resistant to that disease. And one of the important things that our technology could do was genetically identify the presence of the genes that impart disease resistance, right? So
Okay.
if you breed trees together and you produce a bunch of seedlings, you want to screen out the ones that are, you want to screen for disease resistance, right? And you want to throw out the ones that are not.
Yep.
And so he already had some genetic markers to do this, right? Little DNA snippets, just like we have genetic markers that tell us if we had COVID or not, right? Same general idea. And so we helped him identify more markers that he could use in his research. And that was just one application, but that was basically the gist of the business model theory, was that we could help people identify this information faster and in species of plants and animals where there wasn't already a lot of really good information, like hazelnuts. Like nobody outside of Oregon State and like people in Turkey care about hazelnut trees, but we were able to help him with that research, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. So then what kind of led you to move on from that business and look for new ventures?
Well, I think as any entrepreneur, I call myself an entrepreneur in recovery, right? And any entrepreneur can laugh at that, right? They get it. I had done the company for about 4 or 5 years. And in 2011, we had a legal dispute with one of our competitors. And not getting into the details of that, but just to say that it was very disruptive to the business, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I worked through the process of getting us to a place where we were almost ready to settle with that competitor. And in early 2012, one of my old professors at the university, we had coffee one day and he said, "Hey, I want to retire." This gentleman had been at the university for like 20 years. He's like, "They're going to hire this position. Might you be interested?" And I was like, that sounds like a lot less stress than running a small company dealing with a lawsuit. Right. So I made the jump. I applied, I got the job. And then I transitioned the company to be run by the great team that I had put in place. We had just a small team of like 4 or 5 people, but they were doing really good work and they didn't really need me. And without the lawsuit, they were kind of free to go off and do their own thing. So I stepped away. The company managed through the lawsuit wrap up. And then I ended up at the University of Oregon, and that was over 10 years ago now in 2012. So before you know it, like time has flown by, and I've been doing the U of O teaching and entrepreneurship thing for 10 plus years. And now I'm this last year transitioned out of my program role with the Entrepreneurship Center. And now I just focus on teaching at U of O. And that gave me the opportunity to join my friend Caroline at Rain and do what I do now.
Okay. Awesome. So one of the things that I would be very curious, and I think a lot of anyone that does business, runs businesses or has been in business would be interested in. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. It feels like there's a lot of times there's kind of 2 lanes of entrepreneurs. There's the ones that take the MBA way, and they're in college all the way through their MBA, and then they're like, all right, great, now I'm going to go start a business. And then there's the type that end up kind of falling into entrepreneurship, or it's in their DNA and they just can't not do it. And so they never really succeed at working for someone else. They have to start their thing and they go off. But both schools have weaknesses that the others can benefit from. And because you've kind of had feet in both worlds, what are maybe, if you want to give like a handful of things that you see on both sides that could benefit the other? So like from
that's a good question
standpoint and from the bootstrapping side.
Well, I think one of the things that's come into play over the last like let's see, it came out in 2011. So last like 12 years or so is this idea called the lean startup. And if you've heard of that, right, it's a book, it's a methodology, it's sort of a playbook for doing startups. And when I started in 2006, that didn't exist, right? We were still just kind of hunting in the dark. We knew that there was a process to starting a company, but it wasn't like well defined, right? Yeah. And I look back at what I learned in my MBA days and I'm like, okay, well, I kind of learned the old school method. And then the new school method called the lean startup kind of came into being while I was doing my company. And then when I started at the university, I was on a trip to China with students and I read the book called The Lean Startup. And I was like, oh my God, this guy has captured all the things that I did wrong. He is, if I would have read this 6 years ago, like I would have saved myself so much trouble. So it was really powerful to see that like someone had taken the lessons learned from the community of entrepreneurs in the world and put them in a book. It's like, yes.
Yeah.
And so to address your question, I'd say entrepreneurs who are sort of coming from the academic or the process side of like, hey, I want to do a thing and I'm going to do a thing and this is how I do it. That's useful. But at the end of the day, the entrepreneurs who are sort of more personality inclined to be entrepreneurs, and that's like who they are and what they're all about, and like they just kind of know how to make money, those people have sort of the natural instincts, right? Yeah. And like you mentioned, you know, your dad is an entrepreneur, has done business, right? My dad and his dad were both entrepreneurs, right? They're professional services providers. My dad's a lawyer. His dad was a commercial fisherman and then an accountant, right? My uncle's a small time home builder, right? Like these are just like, you just kind of know like how to do stuff like that. Yeah. And so I think there's a little bit of it in your DNA. And there's also a lot that you can take and apply from the sort of the process and sort of the world of sort of big startups, if you will. Yeah. So you kind of need a little bit of both. I think, you know, someone who says these are the steps I need to go through to start a company might lack that sort of instinct to do the right thing sometimes. And sometimes the sole entrepreneur who's like building boats or building houses or whatever, they could use some of the guidance of the process. And so it's a little bit of a balance of both.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. I definitely have seen that play out. I was able to work with my dad before he did retire. And there was certain times where like you would see that instinct kick in and he would get a deal done or do something that was actually, for me, it was amazing at times because you would see him walk into a room and talk to these people. And by the time they're done, they're like, yeah, let's do this. This is a good idea. And I'm like, I don't know. Like he used words, but it was obviously more than words because they said yes. But then simple things came up like, well, how do we, what are we going to do for the bathrooms or whatever it is? And it's like, there would be a breakdown there, like on some simple process things. We're like, oh, well, I think if we just do this, it fixes it, right? Yeah. So you need both.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually a really good book that I use in some of my classes about entrepreneurial DNA. And I think the book is called BOSI DNA, BOSI DNA. And it's sort of like breaks down entrepreneurs into like 4 different types. And it's really useful for people to understand what type of entrepreneur they are. Cause some people are like specialists, right? And they're just like the guy who fixes your car. Like he doesn't care about making a whole lot of money. He just like really likes to fix cars. Yeah. Right. And then there's the opportunist. That is like the person who saw the pandemic happening and went to Costco and bought all the toilet paper. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then there's the builder who is like the person who's like, I want to build a company and build an organization and stuff like that. So there's all different types of entrepreneurs. I think that's important for people to understand sort of what type are you? Yeah,
absolutely. So you mentioned you decided to get reconnected with Caroline, and you said you knew her prior to joining up with her. How did all that kind of come about, and what kind of helped you move in that direction?
Sure. So Caroline and I were both entrepreneurs in Eugene in the like 2006, 2000 to 2010, 11 timeframe. And we were both at an event called the Bend Venture Conference, which is in Bend, Oregon. It's a investment conference. And we were both of us had companies that we were pitching our idea to this investment conference. And I was in the sort of like top tier, and she and her company were in like the lower tier of like quick pitches, and I got like 10 minutes or something. And we were watching the practice, and she's pitching. She's like, "Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm from Eugene." And I was like, "You're from Eugene? I'm from Eugene. Like we should talk, right? Like you're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. And we both have problems that like we want to talk to other people about that they just don't understand, right?" So we met up through that first interaction, and then we co-founded a group in Eugene we called Smart Ups. And it was basically an entrepreneurial support group that came together to just like let entrepreneurs talk to each other, right? So we'd get together and we'd have beer. We called them pub talks. We'd have like an event once a month or every couple of months. And it was just really a place for the entrepreneurs in the community to come together to talk about what they were doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. So then when she started Rain and was doing that, were you like, "Hey, that looks familiar"?
Yeah, I mean, she helped migrate sort of that whole process that we did in Eugene. It migrated into a program of the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, and they ran it for a few years. And she was the kind of program lead for it for a while. And then it evolved into a bunch of different things. It was, she has had, and I have been passionate about as well, this whole idea of like community building, because there's nothing lonelier than being an entrepreneur, because like all the details of your business, what's going wrong, when you're going to run out of money, when, all the bad things. And it's hard. And so I think one of the things that entrepreneurs need, no matter what they're doing, whether it's like a solo plumber or some guy running a company that's got 500 employees, like everybody just kind of needs to talk about what they're doing. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for that reason, I've been part of a coaching group for a couple of years now. And it's been huge in my business, to meet with, we meet every other week and to talk through like, a lot of times it's personnel problems, right? It's like, do I fire this person? Do I give them another chance? And it's talking that through. Well, what are the symptoms? What are the things? Have you been clear with them? Or it's a business decision. Hey, I'm looking at doing this. And when you're talking with other entrepreneurs, they get to answer from, well, if I was in your position, I would do this. And it could just be helpful because all of us think differently. And so it's just helpful to get that kind of, round table discussion going. And a lot good comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is 100%, necessary for all business owners, whether you consider yourself an entrepreneur or not. Like, it's just good to have people you can talk to about your thing. Right. Yeah. And I've got one of my best buddies from college. He and I talk probably once or twice a week. He owns a business out in Montana. And we just talk business stuff. Like, sometimes we'll just talk about the weather and our kids, but sometimes he'll be like, "Dude, I got this thing. Like, what do you think?" Right. And that's really helpful to have somebody you can call to be like, "What should I do here?" Like, personnel issues or strategic issues or all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no really good answer for most things. There's like no perfect answer. So,
right. Yeah. And every situation is different.
Totally.
So awesome. So then when you were looking to reconnect with Rain, then how did you get involved in the capital access side of it?
Well, I had seen the program that had started in, I think, earlier 2022, maybe even 2021. And the previous capital access director had moved on for, I'm not sure the reasons, but he had moved on to something else that fit his skill set. Mm-hmm. And I was just at a place in kind of midsummer of last year where I was like, maybe I should do something else. I'd actually not gotten the job as the director of entrepreneurship of the Entrepreneurship Center at U of O. So I was like, well, if I'm not going to do that, then what do I want to do? Yeah. And I had been watching Caroline right on social media, LinkedIn, and like, "Hey, are you still hiring for this thing?" And she got back to me and said yes. And then I interviewed, and here I am. So it's really just kind of keeping tabs of like who that's doing interesting things. And having seen that this role was open, I was like, that sounds kind of fun. So here I am.
Awesome. So now talk a little bit about what does that entail then? What does your role really mean?
So it's got the funding for it comes from a couple of different sources, and that kind of dictates like what I need to focus on, right? So our first capital access program grant was from the Business Oregon, which is a state agency here in Oregon, and a foundation called the Collins Foundation, and a few other sources that focused on this idea of crowdfunding for equity and or debt financing, right? So I have a business, I need to grow it. Instead of getting, an angel investor, maybe I can go out to the crowd and have a campaign like Kickstarter and rally, $100,000, $200,000 that way.
Yeah.
And so the initial idea was that that's the thing that this director role would do, is go find companies and help coach them up to get them ready to do that process. And as I joined in August of last year, we had a company in Eugene that was doing a crowdfunding campaign called Arable Brewing, and they raised about $68,000 on this Republic crowdfunding platform, and that was successful. Mm-hmm. And then what I've run into over the preceding 6 months or so is that the sort of understanding that crowdfunding for any business is a lot more complicated than it seems. Mm-hmm. Right? Because you've got to you've got to have a business that is interesting enough to a large group of people, right? So everybody kind of needs to understand it. You've got to have through, it's no fault of Republic's, but you've got to meet their standards, right? So they list Republic as a platform, republic.com as a platform where you can list your business for investment, but they do stringent reviews of your financials and your legal documents and all that stuff.
Okay.
And so it's not really easy.
Yeah.
Because you got to do all that stuff. And then you've got to have sort of the time and the wherewithal as an entrepreneur to actually engage in this. Because one thing they don't tell you in any entrepreneurial teaching program is that raising money is a full-time job, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're just trying to get bank loans, right?
Yep.
It's like a whole job by itself. So it's been hard to find companies that fit that mold. But it's been an interesting way to engage with companies that are in the process of raising money. And so then I help them along the way, whatever that might be, whether that's connections to investors or banks or grants or whatever I can do. So that's kind of what I do there.
Yeah. And what would you say is the big difference in why someone would choose to go with Republic versus someone that wants to do Kickstarter or one of the other kind of more well-known ones? Yeah,
that's a good question. So Kickstarter is a product-based rewards crowdfunding, right? Okay. So you've got an idea for a cool new jacket. You put the design out there. You say, hey, I just need to, I need some money to go have these made. All right, I give you $200. I get a jacket back 4 or 5 months later. I've done that, and it's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
Great way to launch a product. Republic and equity-based crowdfunding is similar, but instead of selling a product, what you're giving people is equity in your company. And one of the challenges with that is that, one of the reasons that's helpful is that oftentimes you might have a company that resonates with a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to that same jacket idea. Everybody who runs or cycles or kayaks or whatever is I need that jacket.
Yeah.
Right? There might be people that are willing to invest $500 or $1,000, and you might be able to find a couple thousand of those people. Well, it's really difficult if you're raising money through sort of traditional angel investment circles or angel investment processes. It's really difficult to bring on a couple hundred individual investors. Because that's reporting and forms and a bunch of stuff you got to do. It's that's just a pain.
Yeah.
Republic makes it possible for people to access capital from a lot more people who want to invest less than a typical angel. A typical angel investor might invest $10,000 or $25,000. But if I want to put in $250 into Brandon's company, because I think I don't think Camino Island Coffee is your company, right? But
right, that's my brother-in-law's company.
That's your brother-in-law. So Camino Island Coffee is going to go big. They're going to take down Starbucks, right? I could put $250 in through Republic, and then your brother-in-law's coffee company can have me as a shareholder, but Republic handles all of the reporting administration stuff, right? So you don't have a couple hundred individuals on your list of shareholders that then makes it a real pain to do reporting and all that stuff.
Right. Okay. Very cool.
So it's a really valuable service. It's hard to find thread the needle for everything to come together for a business to really work with that.
Yeah. Well, it involves so many different pieces too. It's the marketing, the advertising, and then the financial side. So like the very technical side of it and the legal side. So yeah, you're hitting everything.
Yeah, it all comes together. And, and the big part is the campaign, right? Like running a crowdfunding campaign is a lot of work. It's all about social media and awareness and getting attention. And it's not easy. And it's not something that I'm good at. I'm not a attention seeking social media person, but
yeah, no, I totally get that. And yeah, I think that is, you do see these Kickstarters or other things like that, crowdfunding things, and they blow up and you're like, oh, well, they put a video together and they threw some stuff on a thing, but that's not what really happened. What happened is everything else that got them to the point where you're actually seeing them on whatever it is.
Exactly. And I've have experience with several friends and former students who have done Kickstarter campaigns, and it's a really effective way to launch a product or something new. But it's certainly not easy, and it also carries a lot of risk. Like, what if you can't make the thing that you said you could make?
Yeah, that's always, it's funny. I think it's on Indiegogo, so maybe not Kickstarter, but it's same idea. And I think we bought it in 2018. I still haven't seen it.
Yeah, and that's just how it works. I mean, I bought a camp stove from an established company in Spokane called GSI. And they were launching this new, slim, really nice, kind of modern looking camp stove. And I saw it in a magazine or something. So I went on and I ordered the Kickstarter. And this was like maybe June of 2020, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm going to do more camping because of the pandemic. So I'll need a new stove. Well, it was great. And their timing was excellent in terms of the market demand. But then we started getting updates from the company. They're like, well, we can't really get it to you by the time we promised because all the factories in China have shut down. And they included in the update they sent, they included a picture of a factory that had the lights off, and they're like, this is our factory. Sorry. Yeah. Right. And then this whole drama about getting it actually made during the pandemic. And I finally got it Labor Day of 2021. But still, that's crazy, right? It took them a year plus to make a stove, and they had it, and this was a company that knew what they were doing,
right?
So, it's a risky proposition. And I've seen lots of companies do great, and then there's other companies, they launch one product and they don't know what their next thing is, and so they have trouble figuring out what's the next thing.
Yeah. Awesome. So you work a lot on you work with the Republic side, getting people stood up on that. What other aspects do you deal with on the capital access side?
Sure. So right now, we've just recently started a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, where we are partnered with an organization called the Portland Seed Fund. And it's a small early stage venture capital fund out of Portland, Oregon, Portland Seed Fund. And our program with them is to help identify founders of color and female founders who are working on scalable tech companies across the Pacific Northwest.
Okay.
And so it's pretty specific, right? And my job there is to go to various places and try to find people who fit that mold of BIPOC founders or female founders, in places where they either might not know about venture capital, or they just assume hey, that's just not for me because I live in, Whidbey Island, right? Or exactly. Whatever.
Yeah.
And it's important to find those people and say, no, actually. And what I do then is help prepare them to meet with the folks at Portland Seed Fund. And then Portland Seed Fund will make that investment decision. But at least we got them access to that pathway that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So that's what our grant is for the next couple of years.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. In fact, I even had connected with a software company up in your neck of the woods. I think in Skagit County. I don't know exactly, but someone who's in your region who is potentially a really cool opportunity. So that's exactly the reason we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that's really neat. And the piece there is that, again, I think people just kind of imagine that if you're not in Austin or, Silicon Valley, there's not the money there. You're not going to have that explosive growth and stuff. But,
there's lots of amazing companies that have come out of what you call non-traditional hubs. Right. And there are a lot of undiscovered gems in places that are outside of the big tech hubs. So, there's a whole movement by a gentleman named Steve Case, who was one of the co-founders of AOL.
Yeah.
And he has a sort of a movement called the Rise of the Rest. And his whole idea is that basically if you think about everything outside of the major tech hubs, there's a huge opportunity to do for companies doing cool stuff. It's like they just need attention and someone to like go there and say, hey, what are you doing? And he's built a whole movement around the Rise of the Rest, and there's podcasts and conferences and all that stuff. So it's kind of like that, but just more Pacific Northwest focused.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. And lastly, what are some of your, you talked about the Portland Seed Fund. Do you have any other big projects you're working on, or even small ones that are kind of fun you want to throw in to mention?
That's kind of that's my focus right now, is helping to coach entrepreneurs, and really working with people like you who are our venture catalysts in the different communities, right? And helping, when you find an entrepreneur who's doing something cool and they're like, I think I want to grow, but I'm not really sure if I need money. Should I get a bank loan? Should I get investors? Like, I like being that person who helps them figure out what's the best pathway for them. So that's kind of my, if I have a sweet spot of things that I do, I really enjoy that part of the job, like helping entrepreneurs figure it out. I've been teaching at the U of O for, this is my 11th year now. So I've done a lot of working with like students who have general ideas, which is great. And I love their enthusiasm and spirit, but like, I really like working with people who are actually making money. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, I can help. Let's see if we can help you make more money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
The last 3 months. I'm a cyclist, and I would say probably a new set of gloves for riding, right? Because in the wintertime, a good set of like gloves makes a rainy bicycle ride better or worse. And I got a new set of gloves.
Yes. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely been there, riding in the rain, and you're like, you can't feel your fingers, and you're like, I think I can stop, but I don't know.
Yeah. He's like, I'm not sure if I'm actually squeezing the brakes or not. Yeah, that's not a good place to be. So buy yourself some good gloves.
Awesome. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
That is tough. I would say probably some of my colleagues at the university, people that I've worked with, but also my good buddies, my good buddy from college that I talk with, a couple times a week. Like, he and I talk about life in general and business and family and all that stuff. I think he's probably most influential.
Awesome. All right. This is a fill in the blank question.
Yeah.
I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
I looked at this, Brandon. I couldn't come up with anything that I was like, oh, that's weird. But I don't know. I don't feel like I've got a lot of stuff that I've always wanted to do that I haven't done.
Never wanted to cycle from the top of North America down to the bottom of Argentina.
So I do want to someday ride my bike down the coast of Norway. So having been there, and there's a British guy who moved to Norway. I don't know why, but he moved to Norway and started making YouTube videos about his bike rides around Norway. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So he's got this whole route that he's mapped out from like, not the full top of Norway, because that's way up there, but like the middle down to the bottom. And so I've, of course, mapped my own route, and I'm like ready to go. It's going to be like a 7 or 8 day trip.
Nice.
But I got to like get there. I got to get in shape. I got to get permission from family. Got to schedule all that. You know how it is.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Who's an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
If you haven't had Caroline on the podcast, that could be interesting. I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't.
I would say Caroline Cummings, our director, would be a good person to bring on the podcast, because she's done some really interesting things with the organization, and she's doing some interesting things, and a little bit of like a fill in the blank, like this is weird, but I've been to Pakistan, which is not a normal place that you would go just on vacation, right? But I got involved with a university professor here in Eugene who had a grant program to help a university in the mountains of Pakistan built out their entrepreneurship center. So I was the entrepreneurship guy at U of O. She's like, hey, you want to do this? And I said, sure. So through that program and that engagement, I then, they did a second grant a few years later, and Caroline got involved with that. And then she went to Pakistan in 2019 or 18. I'm not sure which one. And then I went again in 2019. And now Rain has been to Pakistan in early 2023 to help establish and grow women's entrepreneurship.
That's awesome.
So she'd be interesting to talk to about that, because that's a really that's a really genuine interest of hers, is helping encourage women entrepreneurs, because even though we're in the 2020s, we're still a long way from sort of parity between men and women in business. And it's even more, there's even more disparities in places like Pakistan, where women's role in society isn't even at the same level that it is in the United States. So,
yeah, absolutely. And and that's why some of these other programs you guys are working on are so important. Specifically reaching out to certain groups of people and stuff. Making sure they're seen. Awesome. All right. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
I would say don't worry about where you're going to get to. Don't worry about having a long-term plan. Just do what you feel is best for you at that moment, right? Take advantage of the opportunities that come up to you. And I always this is a piece of advice I give to students, and I try to take it myself, is when faced with two choices and one of them will not reoccur in the future, choose the one that's not less likely to happen to you again, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Brandon. It's great. And I look forward to getting up your way and seeing some of Skagit and Island counties, and having some coffee and checking it out.
Absolutely. All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Nathan Lillegard for joining us on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us get found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CaminoCommons.com/podcast, or check the show notes in the app that you're using. All right, with that, I will talk to you guys on the next one.